والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. From the great scholars of Islam and from the greatest of them after the Sahaba and the first generations are the well-known four A'imma in fiqh: Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmad. May Allah be pleased with all of them. But many people forget that that's not where fiqh began. That's not like, as if Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi and Ahmad began fiqh. No, they took that knowledge from those before them. There were fuqaha, there were scholars of hadith before Bukhari, before Muslim, before Abu Hanifa, before Malik, before any of these scholars. There were other ulama who laid that foundation and they took their knowledge from the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. So the scholar I want to speak about is from the teachers of the first of the fuqaha al-arba'a, the four famous fuqaha. From the first, chronologically, the first of them is the great faqih, the great Imam, Abu Hanifa, Nu'man ibn Thabit. May Allah be pleased with him, may Allah have mercy upon him, great scholar of Islam. But he had teachers. Sometimes people act as if fiqh began with him. No, he laid down the foundation for a lot of what we know from fiqh and usul and so on, as did Imam Malik in hadith and so on, as a Shafi'i, he wrote a risala in usul fiqh, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the great faqih and muhaddith, great scholar of hadith, the author of Musnad, all of them great scholars. But sometimes people forget about the a'imma and ulama that taught these scholars, who may not be as famous as them, but no doubt they are great assets to the Muslim Ummah that we need to know about, we need to learn about. To follow the Salaf al-Salihin, we have to first know the Salaf al-Salihin. We need to know their characteristics, their akhlaq, their mannerisms, their aqaid, their belief systems, their fiqh, their jurisprudence, so that we can appreciate it and follow them. Scholar I'm going to speak about today is Al-Shabi. Al-Shabi is well known for the students of knowledge, no doubt. And if you study fiqh, if you study hadith, you will find him in asanid. If you study fiqh, you will find his aqwal. When you study al-Mughni, for example, very common, Muwaffaq ibn Qudama will quote Al-Shabi, right? Even if you study al-Hidayah or so on, Hanafi fiqh, or if you read the works of Imam al-Nawawi, al-Majmu', or even Ibn Hazm, for example, they will many times quote Al-Shabi, but most regular people don't know who he is. So inshallah we'll speak about him today briefly. His kunya is Abu Amr and his name is Amir. His name is Amir ibn Shirahil, and some people said Ibn Abdullah ibn Shirahil. But what is well known, like al-Dhahabi, he writes about him, Abu Amr, Amir ibn Shirahil al-Hamdani thumma Sha'bi. What does that mean? He is from the people of Yemen, mashallah, the great people of Yemen, the great wisdom and knowledge that they brought. They had qaba'il, they had tribes. Hamdani was a tribe, and a sub-tribe from that is a Sha'bi. So he is from the greater tribe Hamdani, and then from the sub-tribe called Sha'bi, and that's what he became famous by, is a Sha'bi. The Sha'bi is from the early Tabi'un. The early generation of Tabi'un. The Tabi'un we have divided in three, right? And they're the early ones that spent a lot of time with the Sahaba, that learned a hadith directly from the Sahaba. And then there are the middle ones who were a little bit later on, and they met the Sahaba, but didn't have as much time. And then there are those that barely saw the Sahaba, but didn't actually take a hadith from them and so on. But because they saw the Sahaba, they're still Tabi'un. But he is from the early ones. He was born in the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. And Umar radiallahu anhu, as you know, his Khilafah is early, because Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu Khilafah was only 2.5 years. So from the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 2.5 years later, Umar radiallahu anhu became Khalifa. So he was born in the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Regarding the exact dates, there is some Khilafah ulama, but around the 21st year of Hijri. After not the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but after the hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some ulama said 20, but what we see commonly is 21 years Hijri. And regarding his death, Jazakumullah khairan Sheikhana, usually we find 103 Hijri, although some of the ulama said 100 Hijri. Why? Ulama were not that concerned about the exact dates of birth and death. It was more about their accomplishments. But he was born around the 21st of Hijri and died around 103 Hijri. From what one of his students reports directly from him and from his son and others, they mentioned that he saw more than 500 of the Sahaba. Yani, again, some of the Tabi'un, they barely saw a Sahabi, and people will say, oh, this and that. But he met with more than 500 of the Sahaba. I searched him in a database we have for Hadith narrators, just to see who he reported from. And I found 47 different Sahaba that he narrated Hadith from. Like, not just saw them, but he reported a Hadith from them. And that's what I found. Maybe somebody can find more. But what does that tell you? That he definitely took knowledge directly from the Sahaba, memorizing Quran from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and then later from the students of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, memorizing and reporting a hadith from the likes of Anas ibn Malik and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhum. He was taught by other tabi'un as well. Yani, it's not that every teacher of his was a Sahabi, but in a hadith, if we find him narrating mursalan, almost exclusively it's from the Sahaba. And that's something that shows you that he's early on from the tabi'un. From his students are also great scholars like Qatada, Abu Ishaq al-Shaybani, and the great scholar Nu'man ibn Thabit, Abi Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa, that's well known for his fiqh, was from the students of Shabi. Shabi, one thing I found very interesting, that I was reading about who he took hadith from and Quran from and fiqh from, but he also learned mathematics, arithmetic from Al-Harith Al-A'war, who was from the people who used to be under the guidance of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu. And that's interesting. The ulama of the past, they were well versed in Islamic sciences, no doubt, Quran, Hadith, and so on. And everybody had their specialty. Different people were either very good in Hadith, or very good in Qur'at, or very good in fiqh. Some of them were all-rounders and so on. But they were also well versed in science and math and so on, as later on we'll talk about the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah and others. He was given a distinction as being the teacher of the children of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan is from the Umayyah, from the kings of the Umayyad dynasty. But he was also somebody very concerned about the upbringing of his children. And that's interesting. Even the muluk of the past, the kings of the past, they were very concerned about giving their children good Islamic upbringing. Now, there is a lot to discuss about him and the Umayyah and then the Abbasiyya and Al-Hajjaj and others, but we don't have time to get detail into that. But I will mention a few things that Dhahabi and others they said about him. They said that no doubt that he was upon the Sunnah, of the Prophet ﷺ. And Al-Dhahabi said about him that he was athari, and he was very strong to be upon the athar, upon the evidences. And he would reject and he would condemn the people of desires, like Al-Dhahabi mentioned the Qadiriyya, the Murjih, the Khawarij, and the Shia. In his time, these fitan started. And some scholars would sometimes fall into some of these fitan. Like some of the ulama, they fell a little bit into the irja. Some of the ulama, they would sometimes support the Khawarij. Sometimes some of the ulama of that time, and sometimes they would correct themselves, and sometimes they would fall into the fitna of the Jahmiyyah later on, the Mu'tazila. But Al-Shabi was from those that was firm on the Sunnah. And Al-Dhahabi says he was from the Athariyya. He was people of Athar. And he was firm on the Aqidah. He would follow the way of the Salaf al-Salihin in his belief. And even in his fiqh, he was firm on sticking to the Athar, to the narrations, to the evidences. And interestingly, there are quotes from some of the ulama of Tariq about him and Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who was also a great scholar, who was also from the ulama of Kufa, both of them being from Kufa. But Ibrahim al-Nakha'i would be at times scared to speak in front of Al-Shabi. One, because Ibrahim al-Nakha'i mentioned because Shabi was older than him, and that is from the good etiquettes, that you don't blab on in front of your elders. Right? And secondly, because Shabi would correct him to always be upon the athar, and when he would rely too much on rai, on the opinions and qiyas, Shabi would condemn that. He would stick firm upon the evidences. Now, when we talk about the ulama of the past, sometimes you write about their works. Like in that same generation around that, Ibn Abi Shayba, Abdul Razak al-Sana'ani and other ulama were writing large volumes of books of hadith, and others were writing books in fiqh, others were putting together maghazi, yani the seerah or the history books. Interestingly, Shabi never wrote. And he himself says, I have never put the black on white. What does that mean? It's not racism here, relax. Huh? Sheikh Harun, relax, man. Huh? He would not put ink on paper. Right? He would not put ink on paper. He said, I never put the black on white. And when he was asked, he said, because I never heard anything except that I memorized it. And I never needed to ask somebody twice of what they narrated, nor did in my entire life that I have to revise anything I memorized. Subhanallah. Yani the Arab of the past, they were so eloquent and they were so good at memorizing. Even in the time of Jahiliyyah, if somebody could write, they would think this is a weakness. That they would need to write because they would forget. Today, even if I write things, I forget them. May Allah protect us. Yeah? But Sha'bi was so strong in memorizing that every hadith that he heard, every qawl statement of the Sahaba that he heard, every ayah and tafsir that he heard, every fiqh ruling that he heard, he would just memorize it. And he himself said, I never had to tell somebody, can you repeat that? And if I heard it once and memorized it throughout my life, I never had to go back and revise it. So why would I write it down? And that's interesting. Now, not to take away from the likes of the ulama that wrote down their knowledge, because more of that got preserved and sent down to us. Like Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba and the Musannaf Abdul Razak and these earlier ulama, their books that were written, of course it preserved that knowledge in writing and memorization, because the hadith were memorized as well. But this is something that shows his great ability and his knowledge. Regarding his appearance, he was known to be slender, skinny, and it was known that he had a twin brother. Although I didn't find much about his twin brother, but they said he had a twin. He was light-skinned and from the people of Yemen, and he would get reddish. At times he would get reddish. And it was documented, some of the ulama that saw him said, we never saw somebody with a beard bigger than his. So he had a very large beard. He was, interestingly, well known for his humor as well. I found this very interesting. Because yes, he was a great abid, a worshipper. Yes, he was great scholar. Yes, he was great in Quran and Hadith. And yes, he was firm on the truth and Aqidah. But he wasn't a robot. Like, he wasn't a dry person. He wasn't somebody. In fact, I found theses and small rasail that have been written just about his humor, about his jokes. I'll mention a couple of them. Obviously, we don't have time to get into a lot of them. And I mean, they're not knee slappers in English, because obviously we're translating here. But one man came to him and he asked him, does shaitan have a wife? Does Iblis have a wife? So he told him, I don't know, because I wasn't invited to the walima. And what kind of question is that, right? Like how would we know unless there's an ayah or hadith? So he just, instead of just saying, no, there's no, he just told him, no, I don't know, because I never got the invite to the walima, so how am I supposed to know, right? In those times, there used to be the area of khala, which used to be outside. So people would have a place to make ghusl inside the house, but to like defecate and things like this, they would go outside, because they didn't have running sewer system and things. So as he was going to the khala, he saw one of the people whose awra was partially exposed. So because the people go out to the khala, he covered his eyes He covered himself. He was worried about seeing the awrah of a man. There's a man jokingly told Shabi, he told him, when did Allah take away your sight? He said, he had his eyes closed. He told him, when Allah took away your izar. When your izar was lifted, then my sight's taken away. How can I look at you? So Shabi, he was known for his sense of humor as well. Az-Zuhri said, the people of knowledge are four. Now Zuhri, you know, Imam Az-Zuhri, we spoke about him earlier. He was a great, amazing scholar in himself. So when he says that the leaders of the people of knowledge are four, you can understand what pedestal he's putting the person on by praising him in that early generation. He said Sa'id ibn Musayyib in Al-Madinah, and we spoke about him in these series. He said that Al-Hasan al-Basri in Basra, and we spoke about him in this series. And he said Makhul in Sham, and we'll speak about him inshallah in these series. And he said Amir al-Sha'bi in Al-Kufa. And I plan to cover all four. Only one is left from them, and inshallah we'll cover them in these series inshallah. From the distinctions that he had, because scholars are not just narrating hadith and Quran all day, they also have a very important part in the development of the ummah, and something people forget today, is that he was the envoy to the Romans from Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. So Abdul Malik ibn Marwan would send him with messages to the Roman king. Now, Constantine was the Roman emperor at the time, and what he had done, he had made a small entrance, a small door to his throne or his court. So everybody coming would have to bow their head to get in. And that was a trick to kind of humiliate and to try to make people subservient to him. So most people that went, they saw this. Of course, they're entering upon a king, and there's soldiers, and there's weapons, and this is the Roman emperor, and he's got armies. So they would just do it, And that's the thing sometimes we see today. People that go and meet the Pope, and they're bowing to him, like Muslims, na'udhu billah, to try to gain favor from these kinds of people. But the ulama of the Salaf, they used to be firm upon their deen. They didn't bend for anybody, literally and figuratively. So Shu'bah, what he did is that he turned around and he bent down backwards and then entered without ever bowing to the king. So now, the Roman king, he was impressed. He said, nobody ever got around my trick except for him. And when Shu'bah started speaking to the Roman emperor was very impressed by his knowledge and his wisdom. So he tried to keep him as long as he could. He tried to delay him. After a while, Shu'bah said, I have to get back to the Khalifa, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. So he told him a lot of praise and told him, why don't you stay with us and why don't you join with us? He tried to get him on the side of the Romans. Of course, Shu'bah, he was not taking it. And he was like, I have to go back. So he sent a letter back with him. And this is very interesting. So when Shu'bah came back to Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, he had not opened the letter. He took that letter as an amana, and he gave it to Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. And then he left. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, when he opened the letter, he called Shu'bah back. He said, call the people to bring Amir al-Shu'bah back. When Shu'bah came back, he told him, Sha'bi, he told him, come back. When he came back, he told him, do you know what was in the letter? Imam al-Sha'bi told him, I don't know. I didn't read it. He said, it says in the letter that the Roman king is writing to me that I'm shocked, I'm surprised that the Arab or the Muslim would choose you as their leader while they have somebody as intelligent and as eloquent as this young man. This is an insult to Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. And you know that usually if a king sees a threat to his kingdom or his position or his leadership or his kursi, he would either execute the person or exile them or blame them or imprison them or push them away because he sees a fear to his throne. So Abdul Malik bin Marwan tells Al-Shabi, he tells him that, do you see what it said? Al-Shabi was intelligent, he was quick. So he didn't tell him, yeah, that's true, like he didn't try. Instead he said, yeah, Amir al-Mu'min, oh, leader of the believers, it's only because he saw me and he hasn't seen you. If he had seen you, he would of course be more impressed by you. Like he took it in a humble way. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, also a very intelligent man. If you study him, we studied him during the Sirah Durus when we talked about the Umayyah. You should watch those series. He said no. He said, do you know why he said this? Al-Shabi said, I don't know. He said he said this because he's jealous, he's envious of me having people like you around me. See how intelligent he was? He didn't, my kingdom is in threat. No, let me get rid of this guy. No. He said that the Roman king realized that you're an asset to me. So he sent this letter hoping that either I would read it and get jealous and kill you or exile you so he could recruit you. He said, but instead I will bring you even closer to me. And this was also the intelligence of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. He saw through the trick of the Romans. When we talk about Imam Al-Shabi, there are a lot of aspects of wisdom we can learn from him. Because we have food and so on, I don't want to take too long. So I will mention a few of his statements, and each one of these I found in the books of Hadith. They didn't just just random statements. Actually books of Hadith with sanad for each one of these. The first one, Ad-Darimi has mentioned in his Sunan, where Imam Al-Shabi was asked about a mas'ala. Now as I mentioned, he took knowledge from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So he said, this is what I heard from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So he gave the answer directly with the athar, with a hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, mawqufan, from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So the person said, yes, that's the opinion of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, but I want to know your opinion. So Shabi said, I'm amazed at you, I shocked at, what's wrong with you? He told him, I told you Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the Sahabi, the companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, gave the fatwa on this, and you know this, but you still want to know my opinion? Who am I? In front of the Sahaba. He said, I would rather sing you a song than give you my opinion. And I told you he had a sense of humor. So he responded in this way. He said, Al-Bayhaqi has reported this, sanadan. He said, be careful of two calamities. The openly sinful scholar and the ignorant abid. He said, the openly sinful scholar, when you see him, people will say that he would have been at a level of knowledge if only he was dedicated to his ibadah. And the ignorant abid may worship, but people will say that he would have worshipped correctly if he had knowledge. So be careful of these two, because they will glide you astray. There will be a calamity upon you. From the Sahih of Imam Muslim, Samura ibn Jundub radiallahu anhu has a hadith. In the sharh of that hadith is a statement of Al-Shabi. So I'm going to mention the narration from the Sahabi first, and then the explanation. Samura radiallahu anhu says, I used to be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I used to memorize a lot of what he said. And the hadith, the statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I used to sit in those gatherings of the senior Sahaba, and I would know a lot of things, but I would stay quiet because I saw elders in front of me. People who were older than me. And that is from the etiquette of a student of knowledge. And that is from the etiquette of a Muslim, to respect the elders. Here, Ibrahim al-Nakhai, in the explanation of in the Sharh of Sahih Muslim, there's a statement Ibrahim al-Nakhai said that when Shabi would come, I would become silent because he was older than me. And he said, I would see a Shabi in front of those older than him being quiet, even though he knew more than them. Imam Ad-Darimi in his Sunan, he mentions from Al-Shabi that he said, when you hear a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then adhere to it, stick to it, be firm upon it, and take every right, every opinion other than it and throw it in the trash. And this is from the teachers of Abu Hanifa. This is from the earlier Imam. You see their adherence and their strictness upon the Sunnah. He said, when you find a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, stick to it, be firm upon it. And every other opinion that is not in line with that, throw it in the trash. He mentions a beautiful narration where he says there are 4 distinctions to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq that Allah gave to him that he didn't give to anybody else. That nobody on the wajh of the earth, on the face of the earth, had these four except Abu Bakr radiyan. He said first he was called a Siddiq, and nobody was given this as from Allah and His Messenger except for him. And this title was given to him. He said second, he was the Sahib fil Ghar, he was the companion in the cave when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was hiding from the mushrikeen. He was the only one with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No other Sahabi, nobody else will ever get that distinction. He said third, he was on the hijrah with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Mecca all the way to Medina, and nobody else had that distinction to be the Sahib in the entire hijrah. And then he said that he was the only one who was asked to lead the salah during the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yani we know Abdurrahman bin Auf at a time led salah, and Rasulullah came back from being away and played behind him, but he wasn't asked in the presence of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But at the end of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was sick, when he was there in Medina, at the time before his death, all of the Sahaba are there. Umar is there, Uthman is there, Ali ibn Abi Talib is there, radiyallahu anhu. But the only one, as the Sahaba agreed and the Prophet ﷺ approved to lead the Salah while the Prophet ﷺ was alive, was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. I'll mention two more beautiful statements from him, and then inshallah we'll end so the brothers can eat before Isha. And sisters, we give food to everybody. One thing interesting he said, and this also been a report from Hassan al-Basri, he said if it wasn't for the munafiqun, like somebody was criticizing the munafiqun, he said if it wasn't for the munafiqun, we would feel lonely in the streets. And that many people have come to nifaq that we would feel lonely on the streets. Now imagine this was at the time of who? The tabi'un. Imagine if they were here today. Imagine if they saw our online personalities and then when we're sitting in front of somebody, the amazing difference that we find. Imagine if they were alive in this time, but this was in his time. And he said there are two prerequisites for knowledge, and something beautiful. He said intelligence and devotion and ibadah. He said whoever wants to seek knowledge should have these two. They should be intelligent and they should be devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said the person who is devoted but doesn't have the ability, he will never grasp the knowledge. And he said the one who has the ability but he doesn't have that loyalty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sincerity for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the knowledge will not benefit them. So these two he gave, and Ibn Hibban has mentioned this about him. Regarding this great scholar, he was at a time of fitan, a time of trials and tribulations, a hard time in the ummah. He was there during the time of the Umayyah, and he was in the same time as the Hajjaj. And there are many stories about him and how he handled Hajjaj intelligently and in a way that he was able to keep his harm away from himself and from the ummah as best he could. And he was there during the Abbasid revolt, so he had to deal with the Abbasiyah, having been close to the Umayyah, but he dealt with it in a very balanced manner. And as I said, in his time, the Qadiriyah, the fitna of the Khawarij, the fitna of the Mu'tazila, the fitna of the Rawafid, the Shia was there, and he was clear in his condemnation and his firm stance on the Athariyah, as Al-Dhahabi has mentioned that word clearly about in his biography. He used to teach in Al-Kufa, and at a time he just stepped away. And many scholars of history have discussed why. And the general opinion is that he saw the younger scholars doing well, taking a lead, so he decided to step back and let them lead. And that's something beautiful. He didn't try to, this is my seat and I don't want to give it up kind of a thing, right? He allowed the next generation to lead. And he passed away, as I mentioned, according to the majority of the ulama, in 103 Hijri. Regarding Imam al-Shu'bah and Al-Shabi, two different scholars. They were some of the early influences on Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi. From this, inshallah, I want to cover probably a couple of more of the early tabi'un, but then I want to start the series about the four ai inshallah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq in time and ability. Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad, and we want to discuss them in detail. And then others, there were great ai of that time like Al-Awza'i, and then later on like Dawood al-Zahiri and others. Inshallah, we will go through all of them by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability in these durus to benefit, to actually learn who are the Salaf al-Salihin, so we can follow in their footsteps in our ibadah, in our akhlaq, in our ilm, in our aqidah, in all of our methodologies. We follow them practically, not just in name. And inshallah, that this makes us better ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa jazakum Allahu khairan. We'll take QA later inshallah, because I think brothers want to eat, and then we